In this section, we'll run through a little bit of terminology and types of APIs. So far, we've been using the generic term API, but there are different ways of implementing them. Let's start with REST APIs. These are also known as RESTful APIs. REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and of course it's an API all the same, except there are some constraints and rules you need to abide by when designing and building them. Some examples of these constraints for RESTful APIs are they must use a server-client architecture, so the server and clients are separate entities. They must also use HTTP methods, such as get, post, put, and delete to manipulate data. And finally, they must be stateless, so each individual request can be understood by the server. There's a little bit more to RESTful APIs than that, but this gives us enough to start with. Just try to remember that API is more of an architectural pattern rather than a standard. Next up, we have public, partner, and private APIs, and these are a little bit more straightforward. A public API is simply an API that anyone can use and interact with, like the previous Cat API that we looked at. Other popular examples might include Twitter or the Google Maps API. Partner APIs might be shared between a number of companies. For example, a central bank might publish data for other banks to access via an API. And finally, we have private APIs, which are generally used within a single organization. Maybe you work for a tech company that publishes lots of applications, so you might want to consider one set of APIs to handle authentication and authorization of customers across all of those applications. Next is the term endpoints, and I've used this a bunch of times already. This term gets thrown around a lot, and you'll hear it probably in every video in this course. When you're scoping pen tests, you might hear things like, there are about 20 endpoints, or all the endpoints are rate limited. So an endpoint is a specific URL, Uniform Resource Locator, that represents a resource or service that can be accessed by making requests to that API. For example, going back to our cat API, /facts is an endpoint that returns a list of all of the cat facts known to humanity. Well, maybe not all of them. We could also make calls to the /breeds endpoint, which would then return a list of known breeds. These are both API endpoints. Next up, we have methods that are often documented with an individual endpoint. So some of the basic ones are get method, which retrieves a resource, a post method, which creates a resource, put, which updates or creates within an existing resource, patch, which partially modifies an existing resource, and delete that removes a resource. So that's it for terminology. Next up, we have an overview of API security, so I'll catch you there.